Welcome, everyone. Before we even really get started today, I want to warmly welcome you and offer a divine blessing for your day and for your entire week. May you find insight, peace, and inspiration in whatever you're doing right now.
Yes, absolutely. We're really thrilled you've joined us for this deep dive.
We are. And today we're immersing ourselves in Matthew chapter 27. Now, for many of you listening, the sequence of events here, the trial, the crucifixion, the burial of Jesus, it's already pretty well charted territory.
Right, it's the classic Sunday school narrative.
Exactly. But our mission today is to move way past those familiar overviews. We're examining this narrative through the incredibly detailed historical and cultural lenses provided by the Holman and the NAA Study Bibles.
Which is such a fascinating way to look at it. Because when you dig into the historical commentary surrounding these events, you quickly realize you are looking at a massive collision. It's brutal Roman law, strict Jewish custom, and ancient prophetic writings all crashing together in just a matter of hours.
Yeah, and we want to uncover those gritty legal layers. The study notes were pulling from ground every single action in startling archaeological reality.
From the specific coins exchanged right down to the physiological realities of the execution.
To really see that, we have to look at the immediate aftermath of the betrayal. It's Friday morning. The religious leaders have handed Jesus over to the Roman governor, and the text gives us this chilling, quiet scene with Judas Iscariot.
Returning the 30 pieces of silver.
Right, and looking at the historical context from the sources, that specific amount, 30 pieces of silver, wasn't just a random handful of currency they had lying around. According to Exodus 21.32, that was the exact legal compensation price for a slave who had been gored by an ox.
It was literally the ledger price of a dead slave. And understanding the valuation is just crucial. The religious leaders were assessing Jesus at the absolute lowest possible human price under ancient Jewish law.
It's a profound insult encoded right into the transaction itself.
Exactly. And what unfolds next with Judas is deeply tragic, especially when you look at the original Greek terminology the study notes highlight. The text says Judas experienced remorse, which translates to a deep, agonizing regret. But, and this is key, it wasn't true repentance.
Because repentance implies a complete change of heart, a turn back toward God.
Right. Instead, he's just consumed by despair. He hurls that blood money straight into the temple sanctuary and leaves to hang himself.
And the reaction of the chief priests here is incredibly telling. These are men who are perfectly comfortable funding a betrayal, but the moment the silver hits the temple floor, they suddenly become these extreme legalists.
Suddenly, they care about the rules.
Right. They declare they can't put it into the sacred treasury because it's blood money. So they use it to purchase a potter's field to serve as a cemetery for foreigners, which becomes known as the Field of Blood.
Which seems like just a real estate transaction.
It does, but the commentary points out that it's actually a brilliant prophetic mashup by the author.
Yeah, Matthew attributes this fulfillment to the prophet Jeremiah, but it's really a synthesis of Zechariah 11 and passages from Jeremiah 19 and 32.
Oh, so?
Well, Zechariah is the one who specifically mentions the 30 pieces of silver being thrown to the potter in the house of the Lord. Meanwhile, Jeremiah speaks of buying a field as a symbol during the impending destruction of the nation.
So it's weaving them together.
Exactly. By combining these references, the text is subtly but powerfully communicating to the first century reader that rejecting the Messiah and valuing him at the price of a slave sets the stage for a tragic, looming judgment on the city of Jerusalem.
Wow. With that dark prelude established, the narrative shifts to the Roman headquarters. Jesus is standing before Pontius Pilate, the Roman prefect of Judea. And right in the middle of this tense political standoff between Pilate and the massive crowd, there's this incredible interruption.
Oh, Pilate's wife.
Yes. She sends him an urgent message out of nowhere, telling him to have nothing to do with this innocent man because she just suffered a great deal in a dream about him.
That detail carries immense psychological weight when you factor in Roman culture. Romans didn't view dreams the way we do today, just as subconscious processing of our daily stress.
Right, they took them very seriously.
Very. They viewed dreams as direct divine omens, pressing messages from the gods. So for the wife of a Roman governor to experience a terrifying dream specifically about a prisoner currently standing trial in her husband's courtyard, that would have deeply unsettled Pilate.
Even as a ruthless political leader.
Especially then. He was pragmatic, but this kind of supernatural warning would make him desperately want to find an off-ramp to avoid angering the divine.
And he thinks he finds that off-ramp with the Passover custom of releasing a prisoner. We all know the story of Pilate offering the crowd a choice between Jesus and Barabbas, but looking at the linguistic background changes the entire dynamic of that choice.
The Greek word used for Barabbas?
Yes, lestis. While older translations might just say robber, the historical consensus from the study Bibles is that lestis refers to a violent insurrectionist or a revolutionary.
Barabbas wasn't a petty thief stealing bread. He was likely part of a localized guerrilla movement fighting against the Roman occupation. In a subjugated nation, men like Barabbas often held a real populist appeal among the common people.
Even though he used murder to achieve his aims.
Exactly. So Pilate's offer is a stark, almost absurd contrast. On one side, you have Jesus, a teacher who explicitly preached peace and loving one's enemies. On the other side, a known, violent revolutionary who has actually shed blood in the city.
The socio-political irony of the crowd choosing the violent rebel over the peaceful teacher is just staggering. Pilate sees a full-blown riot brewing, and he resorts to a highly theatrical gesture. He calls for a bowl of water and washes his hands in front of the crowd, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood.
Which, ironically, is a Jewish ritual.
Right, found in Deuteronomy 21, being used by a Roman magistrate to absolve himself of guilt in a capital murder case.
It's a profound clash of cultures, but ultimately a vain attempt at evading responsibility. Under Roman law, Pilate held the absolute, singular authority to release Jesus. He knew the man was innocent, yet he caved to political pressure.
And in response to his hand-washing, the crowd shouts back, "His blood be on us and on our children."
Now, the historical commentary on this moment is crucial, and we need to look at it strictly through the lens of first-century law.
Definitely.
In its immediate context, the crowd was formally, legally accepting moral responsibility for the execution verdict. Historically, many scholars in the notes see this as a tragic foreshadowing of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD.
But the notes also make a point about how it was interpreted later, right?
They do, very carefully and objectively. They point out that over subsequent centuries, this specific, localized phrase was entirely ripped from its historical context and tragically misused to justify horrific persecution and anti-Semitism.
That context is vital. It grounds the phrase in a specific first-century legal reality rather than some sweeping, timeless curse. So, the verdict is sealed. Pilate releases Barabbas and hands Jesus over to his soldiers.
And once the political maneuvering fails, the machinery of Roman execution takes over.
And that process started long before anyone reached the execution site. The scourging was an integral part of the punishment, and I have to warn you, the historical reality of the instrument used, the Roman flagellum, is incredibly grim.
It is a terrifying piece of engineering. The flagellum was a specialized leather whip, but its thongs were densely interwoven with sharp pieces of metal, lead balls, and jagged fragments of bone.
And Jewish law had a strict limit of 39 lashes, right?
Yes, but Roman scourging had absolutely no legal limit. The objective of the soldiers was to inflict maximum trauma, bringing the victim as close to the brink of death as possible without actually stopping their heart.
The historical accounts from the era are just brutal.
They describe victims having their flesh literally stripped away, exposing deep muscle tissue, veins, sometimes even internal organs. The victim would be in a state of deep, hypovolemic shock before the crucifixion even began.
Knowing that physiological reality changes how you read the next few verses, after nearly killing him with the whip, the soldiers gather the whole battalion to mock him. They strip him and throw a scarlet robe on him.
The commentary suggests this was likely a faded soldier's cloak, a chlamys, used to mock the royal purple garments of Judean kings.
Right. They twist a crown out of long thorns, jam it onto his head, put a reed in his hand as a fake scepter, and begin striking him. Once they've had their fun, the journey to Golgotha begins. And here, the medical trauma of the scourging really manifests. Jesus is so heavily bloodied and weakened that he physically cannot carry the cross.
Specifically, he couldn't carry the patibulum, the horizontal crossbeam.
The upright post was usually already there.
Yes, permanently fixed in the ground at the site. But the crossbeam itself could weigh upwards of 100 pounds. For a man already in profound physiological shock, carrying that rough wood across a lacerated back was biologically impossible.
Because he was collapsing, the Roman soldiers utilized their legal right to forcibly draft a bystander into service, a man named Simon of Cyrene.
The text gives us just a brief mention of him, but the historical background is fascinating.
He was from North Africa, right?
Modern-day Libya. Simon was an African Jew who had likely saved up for years to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. He was probably just arriving, completely unaware of the morning's political firestorm, and suddenly he's forced under the weight of a blood-soaked execution beam.
And that horrific random encounter seems to have fundamentally altered his family's trajectory.
It really did. The historical notes point out that in other gospel accounts, Simon is explicitly identified as the father of Alexander and Rufus,
Meaning the early church knew his kids.
strongly suggesting that Simon and his family went on to become prominent, well-known figures in the early Christian community. It's a remarkable detail about finding a personal legacy right in the middle of an imperial execution.
They finally reach the execution site, Golgotha, the place of the skull. Right before the soldiers nail his wrist to the wood, they offer Jesus a drink. It's wine mixed with gall or myrrh.
The historical consensus is that this mixture acted as a mild narcotic or sedative.
Provided by the wealthy women of Jerusalem, usually, right?
Yes, to slightly dull the excruciating pain for those being executed. But Jesus tastes it and explicitly refuses to drink it. He consciously chooses to face the unmitigated physical and spiritual agony completely conscious.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of how the cross killed its victims. While paintings often emphasize the nails, modern medical and historical research cited in the notes explains that the primary cause of death in a Roman crucifixion was usually slow asphyxiation.
When a victim is suspended by their arms, the sheer weight of their body pulls down on the diaphragm, locking it in an inhaled state. It makes it incredibly difficult to exhale and draw the next breath.
So just to take a single breath, the victim had to push up on the nails driven through their feet or ankles.
And doing so meant scraping their raw, scourged back against the rough wood of the upright post. They would have to perform that agonizing motion for every single breath. For hours, sometimes days.
Until absolute muscle exhaustion sets in.
Exactly. The victim simply cannot push up anymore and they suffocate. It was a method of execution meticulously designed by the empire to be as prolonged, painful, and public as structurally possible.
And Rome always made sure the public knew exactly why the person was dying. The soldiers placed a titulus above his head.
Or a wooden placard stating the official criminal charge.
His read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." It was meant as a final, cruel psychological weapon by Rome against the Jewish people. Effectively broadcasting, look at what we do to your so-called kings.
Yet beneath this sign, the soldiers are sitting in the dirt, gambling for his clothes, which the commentary highlights as a vivid, direct fulfillment of Psalm 22.
Which is the perfect anchor point for what happens next. Because while the Romans are focused on the physical humiliation of the execution, the narrative suddenly zooms out to massive environmental and cosmic shifts.
From the 6th hour to the 9th hour.
Meaning from noon until 3:00 p.m. Darkness came over the whole land. Now, a modern reader's first instinct is to rationalize that as a solar eclipse. But the study Bibles make a very specific, scientifically grounded point about why that's impossible.
The astronomical reality is that Passover always, without exception, occurs during a full moon.
And you can't have a solar eclipse during a full moon.
Exactly. A natural solar eclipse can only happen during a new moon, when the moon passes exactly between the Earth and the Sun. Furthermore, even a total solar eclipse only casts darkness over a specific location for a few minutes.
Not 3 hours.
Right. 3 hours of total darkness during a full moon is scientifically and astronomically impossible. The commentators emphasize that this was a supernatural darkness. It was a physical manifestation of divine judgment, directly echoing ancient prophecies like Amos chapter 8,
Where it predicts the sun going down at noon.
and the earth darkening in broad daylight.
In the suffocating weight of that darkness, at 3 p.m, Jesus gathers enough breath to cry out with a loud voice. He shouts, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which translates to, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
For someone unfamiliar with the Old Testament, this just sounds like a man broken by physical despair.
But the biblical literacy of the first century gives this cry a much deeper resonance.
He is directly quoting the opening line of Psalm 22. While it absolutely expresses unimaginable agony, the theological commentary suggests it points to the spiritual reality occurring on the cross. This is the moment when Jesus experiences a profound cosmic alienation and separation from the Father as he bears the weight of sin.
He is absorbing the fullness of divine judgment.
Yet, by invoking Psalm 22, a psalm that graphically describes his exact physical sufferings, but ultimately ends in a sweeping declaration of God's victory, he is signaling the ultimate triumph that will follow this suffering.
The moment he yields up his spirit, the physical world fractures. The text records that the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now, I've heard that detail referenced countless times, but reading the actual physical dimensions of this veil in the study notes completely changes the scale of the scene.
It wasn't just a heavy curtain. According to the Mishnah, the first major written collection of Jewish oral traditions, the veil separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies was an architectural marvel,
It was roughly 18 meters high, right?
meaning nearly 60 feet tall
Yeah.
and 9 meters wide. It was crafted from 72 intertwined pleats of fabric and was incredibly dense, as thick as a man's hand.
The historical tradition claims it was so massive and heavy that it took 300 priests just to maneuver it or wash it.
So a textile structure 60 feet high and as thick as a human hand suddenly tears violently in half.
And the specific detail that it tears from top to bottom is what carries the theological weight. If human hands were going to tear it, they would naturally have to start at the bottom. Tearing from the top down signifies a definitive downward act of God.
The barrier that represented the separation between a perfectly holy God and sinful humanity is permanently destroyed.
A barrier only the high priest could pass through once a year. It's a vivid declaration that direct access to the presence of God is now wide open.
And the phenomena don't stop at the temple. The earth violently shakes, rocks split apart, and the text details the bizarre event of tombs opening and the bodies of many saints being raised.
The sheer accumulation of these events has a profound psychological impact on the very people overseeing the execution. Specifically, the Roman centurion and his guards. Think about who the centurion is.
He is a hardened Roman soldier.
He has likely overseen dozens, if not hundreds, of crucifixions. He knows exactly how the grim biology of asphyxiation works. It is a slow, quiet, pathetic fade into unconsciousness.
Exactly. But he watches Jesus cry out with supernatural, authoritative strength right before his death. He experiences 3 hours of inexplicable darkness, and then the ground literally violently quakes beneath his feet the moment the man dies.
It completely shatters the soldier's entrenched militaristic worldview.
It forces him and his men to confess out loud, truly this was the Son of God. It's an incredibly powerful moment where a Gentile executioner recognizes the divine identity of the man the empire just crushed.
As the afternoon wears on, a new urgency sets in. The Sabbath is rapidly approaching at sundown, meaning absolutely no work can be done, including burial preparations. A new figure steps onto the stage, Joseph of Arimathea.
It's fascinating that a wealthy man, and specifically a member of the Sanhedrin, the very council that condemned Jesus, is the one who steps in.
The notes clarify that Joseph was a secret disciple who had fundamentally dissented from the council's murderous decision.
He leverages his considerable high social standing to bypass the normal channels and to request the body of Jesus directly from Pilate. And the commentators highlight this as a striking fulfillment of Isaiah 53.9.
That ancient prophecy stated the Messiah would be assigned a grave with the wicked, but would ultimately be with a rich man in his death.
Joseph, taking the body and placing it in his own newly carved, expensive, rock-hewn tomb, fulfills that to the letter.
So Joseph wraps the body in clean linen, lays it in the tomb, and rolls a massive stone over the entrance. You'd think the narrative would pause there for the Sabbath, but the religious leaders are deeply paranoid.
They actually remembered Jesus' prophecy about rising on the third day much better than his own disciples did.
They go back to Pilate and demand the tomb be secured so the followers can't steal the body and fake a resurrection.
Pilate agrees to their demands, and he deploys a custodia, a detachment of highly trained Roman guards. But they don't just station soldiers there. They take the extra legal step of placing an official Roman wax seal right across the massive stone.
When you dig into first-century Roman law, that seal was not symbolic. A cord was stretched across the stone and fastened with wax bearing the official imperial stamp of the Roman governor.
It legally declared that the contents of that tomb were now the property and under the direct military protection of the Roman Empire itself.
To break that seal without authorization was an act of high treason. The penalty for tampering with an imperial seal was often upside-down crucifixion or being burned alive. The tomb was locked down as tightly as first-century military might and legal power could possibly make it.
Which is exactly why understanding the context is so rewarding for you as a reader. Looking at the weight of a Roman imperial seal, the vast architectural dimensions of the temple veil, or the brutal medical reality of the flagellum, it anchors these events.
It shows us that Matthew 27 was recorded with the precision of a legal document, intended to root faith in verifiable historical reality.
It's a fiercely documented moment in time.
It really is. It fundamentally changes how you view the text. It's not just an ancient spiritual story. It's a vividly real moment in history where politics, prophecy, and brutality all collided.
Absolutely.
But here is a final provocative thought to chew on that builds on all this history we've discussed today. Think about it. The religious leaders demanded a Roman guard and a wax seal specifically to prevent a fake resurrection.
They wanted to end the story right there.
Exactly. But by securing the tombs so perfectly with elite soldiers and imperial authority, didn't they accidentally create the most airtight, undeniable historical conditions to prove the very miracle they were trying to suppress?
That is something to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the sources. We hope you found it as fascinating as we did. God blesses all the listeners. See you next time.